Yeah.
So I'm wondering about sex differences in investment in offspring in the birds.
Yeah.
And also in extra pair mating. So do females stray from their partners? Do males stray from their female partners?
Yeah, so we do have extra pair copulations in these birds. They do form pairs, and so the males in this species will actually provide a lot of critical care during the nesting period. So the females stay on the nests quite a bit for incubation, and the male will actually bring food and feed the female during the incubation period. So the males do invest considerably in the offspring here. I think you probably make the argument not as heavily as the females do, but there is significant male parental care.
And extra pair mating, they both do it. I mean, I'm just wondering, does it make sense for the males to develop regardless of the condition of their female partner, because there's a possibility for them to go out and get extra pair mates?
Right. Yeah, and so I think that's an important element of starting to think about these sex differences is why would these have evolved, and exactly the things you're suggesting. So yeah, so the males, there are extra pair copulations, so there may be advantages even if you're female, regardless of what your partner's doing, being reproductively competent might be useful. But also the other element of that is that, and I just lost my train of thought.
Is it also possible that there are differences in the costs of reproductive development for males and
Well,
females?
yeah, thank you for reminding me, because that's what I was going to say. That the females, for the males, becoming spermatogenic, producing sperm, is not as costly as the females in terms of yolk deposition and actually progressing to egg laying. And so for the males to reach reproductive maturity and just kind of hold constant at that state may be not very expensive, whereas for a female to invest to that point and then kind of be waiting around and it not being appropriate to breed would presumably be more costly.
And then presumably affect her future reproduction.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
With the hyenas, the finding that in larger clans there's a higher birth rate,
Yeah.
does that imply to you that there's the inter-clan or interspecies feeding competition is more intense than the within-clan feeding competition, or not necessarily? Because in primates, of course, you often find the opposite. Larger
Right.
groups with lower birth
Yeah,
rates.
and that's kind of what I was expected to find at the outset. And so I think part of it might have to do with kind of the scale of what we're measuring. So this is in an area where food is relatively abundant. It's a very prey-rich habitat. And it's possible that, I would suspect that we'd reach some point where that relationship would either, flatten out or reverse, that, there is presumably some limit when clan size becomes too big. And we know that clans will fission, for example, in some situations, which could be a mechanism, to cope with kind of this increasing clan size if there are territories open and available to occupy. Yeah.
Just following up a little bit on Marty's question. So for the males, you showed that they went through the whole cycle of development and then termination also. So did you see any kind of holding out on the part of the unpaired males, that they might stay steady longer in the hopes that...
So that's a great question. So we don't really have the data to address that directly. So one thing I haven't told you about these birds is they are what we call eruptive nomads, and so they don't migrate on a regular seasonal basis like a lot of birds we think about. Instead, I kind of like to say they can migrate anytime, anywhere, and so there might be particular times of year where they're more likely to move, but they don't move from predictable site A to site B and then back to site A. They can move across the continent as food's available. So a bird might breed in California one year and breed in Quebec, Canada, and another year. And so what I have some basically tantalizing preliminary data from this study is that seems to be happening is that those males housed alone might be entering a migratory life history stage. So they're ready to breed. There are no females around. the solution might be not to terminate reproduction, but instead to move somewhere else. And so I have some preliminary data that I'd like to follow up on and looking at whether they then transition to migration to go find a locale that would be more appropriate for breeding. And because of this lifestyle, you can imagine that a bird would potentially end up in a habitat one year and there may not be mates around, and so they may need to, you know, respond accordingly. Yeah.
So have you thought about looking at MHC heterozygosity in the pairs or other things that might be determinative of the level of affiliation? I mean, it's striking that there is such variation, but what's causing it?
Yeah, so I haven't done anything to look at that. In terms of making my pairs, I've tried to, they were randomly assigned. I have not, so one thing that is important or might be important in these guys is, so in the Eurasian siskin, the relative, females prefer males with more yellow plumage. And so I have quantified the plumage on my males. I haven't looked to see if the males with the more yellow plumage are the ones that are in more affiliative pairs or not. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole variety of things that we could look at to try to understand, you know, what creates a pair that's affiliative or not. And I think looking at MHC would be a really logical place to go. I'm running a similar experiment right now to try to get more data on this because these sample sizes are really small. So I want to be able to delve into this in a little bit more detail.
So the animals that were paired were all captured from the same location? Or
so these guys were captured, I'm trying to think which experiment this is. So these birds were all captured from the same location over the period of about a month. And so all the birds, I didn't pair any birds that were captured together. So birds were paired with birds that were captured at different times to try to avoid a situation where a bird's captured with a sibling or an existing mate or that kind of thing. So, so they are from the same location. I've done this with birds captured from 2 different locations and paired birds from different locations, and we see the same. We don't have the data on the effect on reproductive physiology, but we see the same variation in affiliation of the pairs. Yeah.
Back to the hyenas, it sounds as the hierarchy is determined in a very peaceful way, and there are almost no challenges. There is a kind of an algorithm that they know about, and is this a correct characterization of it?
Well, so I'd say you see very few interactions that go against the hierarchy. So you don't see lower ranking individuals challenging higher ranking individuals.
Even when they say are bigger and seem to...
I mean, that's not to say there isn't aggression. So,
and
but
at the same time, you have clear data showing that your position in the hierarchy is quite important for your reproductive success. So week ago I was talking to Silk about something similar but also somewhat different in some old world monkeys, in which the hierarchy is also determined in a very similar way, but I think you correct me if misquoting me, but in your case, it's not so clear that your position in the hierarchy is relevant for your success. Now, what you are finding, in principle, is a big puzzle, right? In principle.
You mean that there's just this inherited...
Right, that they don't...
Yeah.
It matters so much.
Right.
Why don't they fight for it? Yeah.
And they're basically, hyenas are basically better monkeys, I think, because the baboons are, or at least some of the monkeys, the effect size of rank, or the consistency of effects of rank are lower, oddly lower, and I think currently something of a mystery why it's not stronger effect. But yours are perfect. I mean, that graph that you showed from Kay's paper.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had to, except for the fact that this puzzle about why rank
Yeah.
is so stable over so
Yeah.
long.
The puzzle is how,
Yeah.
I mean, individuals who would challenge the
Yeah.
hierarchy.
It's a puzzle, yeah.
Right. So, which is very interesting because it points in some directions, which we can talk more about later.
I'd like to ask something about the hierarchy too, because you say that the offspring slots in immediately below their mother. and the males fission off over time. But it seems to me that if the higher ranking females have many offspring, then these middle ranking, then they keep losing
Their relative
status?
position falls over time. Yeah.
And so maybe they're some of the ones who fission off?
So there haven't been a lot of fission events, but there have been some, both in this study location and others. And so there's kind of two models of how fission happens. And Jen, correct me if you want to, because you know more about a more recent fission probably. But so you can have, yes, where lower ranking females, it's been observed where they would fission off and form their own clan, and that would be associated with a real increase in status. And so you have a group of, related natural lines moving off. But there's also been fission that seems to cut across natural lines. And so it predominantly by low and mid-ranking females, but where it's not just like a low-ranking natural line moving off, that you've got some low-ranking individuals staying, others going.
But then they still keep the same dominance hierarchy?
So I don't know how...
There's been a lot of shifting around, and so it seems that in these permanent fission events, that is one opportunity where they could have these overthrows that do happen sometimes when they're stable clans, but as they might split, sometimes they maintain their dominance rank if mothers and daughters go together, but in instances where they don't necessarily, there is some remixing. So, and then there also are local extinctions of whole natural lines within social groups sometimes as well, because of the types of things Heather was talking about. So it's a pretty dynamic kind of
The other thing is we have seen a few reversals of rank, and so what Jen's talking about during the fission is one time. The other time we do see reversals of rank tends to be when an alpha female dies, and so who's going to inherit the alpha status among her daughters. There have been some reversals where the youngest daughter, who should in theory inherit that alpha position, does not, and that another daughter basically is able to kind of usurp that position and take over. We've seen that as well.
Question about the survivorship with mothers not there. Did you also look to see what the effect of other kin are? So if there are older sisters and aunts around, does that?
It's a great question. I haven't looked at that, but potentially, that would be interesting and useful to see.
I mean, you showed us a slide of the mother sort of watching over the two as they were feeding. I mean, do you ever see like older sisters doing that for younger sisters, or is it always just mother or daughter?
So we do know that relatives are important allies in various kind of coalitionary aggressions and activities, and there are I don't know that anyone's, other than kind of coalition formation, I don't know that anyone's quantified other types of like assistance that do.
So I guess Sophie Wahaj, another student coming out of the whole camp lab, looked at sibling effects in survival when they're graduating the communal den, and she was interested in siblicide and the potential costs of having a sibling. And so individuals that had a sibling at this time that Heather's shown is really dangerous and survival is not high, actually survived better than individuals that didn't. So they can be born as pairs or singletons. And
we don't necessarily know what
we don't know what the
interaction
mechanism
might be that
is at all.
generates that.
Just so they survive. So
I mean, the other thing is that it's kind of interesting in this social organization is that close relatives are these potential allies, but they're also your competitors as well. And so the extent to which it might benefit a sister to help out versus costs in terms of her own reproductive success, that of her offspring, there's a trade-off there.
So do mothers have favorites in their offspring?
I don't know. Yeah.
So, this impact of the mother, is there any sex difference in impact
So,
of the mother?
We've only looked at females because the problem is that period coincides with when males are starting to disperse. At about 2 years of age, and so we could look at that weaning. We could look at just the first part of weaning. We can't go out as far, but we could look at that early part after weaning. And I haven't done that, but yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
I'm just, this is probably a question we may not have data to speak to, but I'm interested in how, given the physical dominance doesn't matter in terms of these ranks, how these offspring learn their place in the hierarchy. So does mom actively, stands up when there's some sort of aggression, then, but they have to then not only reason that mom is above that other individual, but that they are too. And
So Kay Holkamp has actually written some nice papers, basically describing in detail the process involved in learning one's rank, and so it is this reinforcement with the mother being really important in terms of while they're at the communal den. So this is a time when all the other young cubs are all together. It's a hub of social activity, so other clanmates are coming and going, and it's during that period that they do figure out, which animals they're above and below, and that the mother plays an important role, that when they, engage in an appropriate, interaction, aggression, the mother can reinforce that, and when it's inappropriate, she doesn't, and so the cub then, might get a little roughed up and learn, okay, I'm submissive to that animal, and so it's this process of learning the position through reinforcement.
It's a direct teaching.
Yeah.
So I have a question about basically how much hyenas are like baboons. So does the project have the kind of data, and I mentioned that you do, to quantify affiliation amongst females?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, proximity, whatever else they do.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to.
No, go ahead, because you actually look at
So I
this
think
data a lot more
some
than I
of
do.
the things that we originally wanted to do exactly sort of how you had quantified your social index, but hyenas don't groom each other, so we
Right.
don't have that.
Right.
What we use instead of proximity, because they're in these fission fusion societies breaking apart,
Yeah.
coming together, we use the proportion of time that they're spent in pairs, and so that's sort of an affiliative,
Mhm,
or using these network approaches, you can get other measures.
mhm.
So we definitely have those kinds of data. They're a little bit different in their structure, but
I just think it would be so
About
nice
top
to look
partners
at
and-
if there is, what things besides rank might matter, and what the relative mix of those things are, because it is striking, they're so similar. We've reinvented this matrilineal hierarchy, et cetera, and it's actually kind of interesting because in primates, it's not so clear why the maternal support would be so essential. So the argument here is, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to let you eat from this carcass. That seems like a really good reason for matrilineal support and hierarchy, but that doesn't work for most primates, which it doesn't look like that at all. So where access to this one super important resource is so that's super interesting.
Yeah.
They've converged on this social system, but they don't seem to have very similar ecology.
Yeah. Well, and that's one reason the hyenas are so fascinating. You've got this carnivore
Yeah.
behaving like a primate.
and maybe that's explaining this difference in the effect size of social rank on these types of
Right.
behaviors. So the fitness consequences of rank having to do with this big piece of meat versus, species and other things that are important for baboons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, but following up on, I thought you provided a possible explanation for why hyenas are matrilineal and why they have this maternal dominance rank in terms of the vulnerability at weaning because of this scarce resource. And I'm not sure how that differentiates it from other carnivores.
So great question. So and kind of the original hypothesis for why female dominance had evolved in hyenas was that they've got intense feeding competition, and so therefore they have, female dominance is this mechanism to cope with that. And the weakness in that hypothesis is that we have lots of other carnivores that have intense feeding competition. So wolves and wild dogs, if you actually try to quantify kind of the intensity of feeding competition, wild dogs and wolves are very similar, on par with hyenas in terms of the intensity of feeding competition that they experience. And so that alone doesn't really seem like a sufficient explanation. These other, carnivores, we don't see female dominance, but it seems to be that intense feeding competition in conjunction with the slow development of the feeding apparatus. So those two elements together seem to be what are unique in hyenas. And so you do find, so the development of the feeding apparatus is not well studied in a lot of carnivores, but where we do have data, you do see some carnivores that have similarly slow development of the feeding apparatus in some of the bears, but they don't have this intense feeding competition. And then the animals with intense feeding competition, they have much more rapid development of the feeding apparatus. So our suggestion is it's these two factors together that set up this unusual kind of evolution of this unusual trait.
Is there a constraint that they can't develop the feeding apparatus faster?
That's the presumption. So if you look at these skulls, if you looked at a wolf or wild dog or a coyote skull next to a hyena skull, it actually looks kind of more like even like this in terms of kind of overall shape. And so these are really large, robust structures that allow for attachment of large muscles. And so the other element is, so hyenas can feed on bone, which a lot of other carnivores don't. And so they actually have this apparatus that's capable of crushing bone. And so even though they're eating soft tissues as well and seem basically disadvantaged in eating soft tissues even at this stage, the development of this feeding apparatus that allows them to consume bone and is really large, robust, powerful, we'd suggest is just constrained in how quickly they're capable of developing it. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if the cooperative hunting patterns can give you another index of social affiliation in that, so I'm assuming if you have a group of 60 individuals that all 60 don't always go hunting together, right? So do they break off in lineages, or how do they
they actually, a lot of their hunting, it's not as cooperative hunting as you might think and as some other carnivores do. I mean, they will hunt in groups, but a lot of kills are made by individual animals. And so the data, when we quantify these affiliation patterns, those times when they're hunting, regardless of what their behavior is, those are included. I don't know that anyone's parsed that out. Have you looked at that separate affiliation during hunting?
No, but I don't know. I tend to think from what we do know about the patterns that it's more of a kleptoparasitic, is like an act coming in rather than cooperation, where a low-ranking animal, which we know hunt at higher hourly rates and typically break away from the rest of the group to hunt, that they're typically going in, getting close to taking this ungulate, and then someone else will just come in and parasitize it. So rather than it being an affiliative, we went through 20 years of data and tried to look to see if there was any affiliative interactions. Actually, we did do that, and we didn't really see much. It was really just someone was starting and someone else would come in, and we thought, well, maybe that's cooperative, but it turns out it's usually a high-ranking one that just comes in and starts making all this noise and brings in other animals, but they don't care because they can still keep eating. So not as affiliative.
Going back to the birds, I was confused about something. Is it possible that females have more cues to their actually having been fertilized than males have about their having successfully fertilized a female? So are some of these measures of reproductive development happening post-fertilization or no?
So the measures of reproductive development, so all of these, other than egg laying, well, and even egg laying can happen in the absence of fertilization. So all these measures generally would precede, these changes would precede fertilization occurring. That would kind of be the last step in the process. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
I have a question. So I was really curious, it's cool, this influence of having a mate and how that influences reproduction in the females, and I was just wondering if there are sibling effects, or if you have other experiments where you might, or maybe that doesn't matter for the siskin.
What do you mean by sibling effect?
Well, are there other social environments that you could potentially change? So having two females together, does that influence reproduction? Does having dependent offspring, I don't know at what point it is.
Yeah, no, I
finished,
mean, I would love to look at that. So this
there
is,
other-
as I say, this is kind of a crude social cue. I mean, in the future, I'd like to kind of, we could look at what about, you know, is it the actual physical interactions with a mate? Is it, you know, is it visual cues? Is it auditory cues? Some combination?
having their son, would that still promote these? I mean,
And also,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I've just been looking at, you know, an opposite sex, but yeah, we could have effects. I would expect that there might be effects of same-sex individuals, and so I think, yeah, this is kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of, you know, trying to understand what kinds of social cues they might be they might be using.
is there any cooperative breeding?
Not in these guys. So they will. They don't breed in like really close proximity, but you will have them kind of in somewhat aggregations during the breeding season. But they are pretty territorial in defending their own nest, and don't cooperate beyond just the male assisting the female.
Okay, so let's think